just like anything else, the practice of connecting people to purpose is a skill set that people can learn. One way that's been well researched by Andrew Carton at the Wharton School, he did a study, an archival study of NASA when they were launching the moon mission, the Apollo missions. And they had a big purpose, right? To put a human on the moon by the end of the decade to advance science. But here's the thing, right? They had this big purpose that they didn't even know if they could achieve. And two, they had about 300,000 contract workers who were working for NASA in all different entities, right? You had people who were doing construction, people who were engineers, astronauts, seamstresses sewing the parachutes on the lunar lander, tailors tailoring astronaut costumes, this enormous workforce. How do you get them connected to a purpose that they might not even be contracted for, the entity when they're around, and we don't know if it's possible?
Right.
And what Andrew Carton found through this archival study was on NASA's blackboards during that time, leaders had written a ladder to the moon, where they would put the big purpose at the top of the ladder, and they would put the group's tasks for that month at the bottom of the ladder. And then they would, each rung on the ladder was a tangible, measurable objective that person's tasks would enable. Then on the next rung was the measurable objective that objective would enable, all the way up to how that task would be essential and indispensable for putting a person on the moon by the end of the decade. This is a practice called laddering. It's a technique you can use to think about work, but it's also a technique you can use to communicate the purpose of people's work. Because what Carton also found is that having an aspirational purpose, if people don't experience it, is meaningless. In fact, it can create dissonance, right? If I'm on the front line, I never hear about how I'm landing a person on the moon. And then I hear this big speech about how you're essential to advancing science. That dissonance can actually decrease meaning in my work, researchers find. But when we can see it every day, when it's talked about every day, when I can literally see a ladder and say, gosh, if I didn't do this, these measurable, tangible things wouldn't be possible to put a person on the moon by the end of the decade, it becomes almost impossible not to believe it. And that leads to the popular story you hear about when John F. Kennedy went to the Space Center and he said, hey, what do you do here? When he saw a janitor, and the janitor very calmly just said, oh, I'm putting a person on the moon. It gives some of the background real practices that were done to cultivate the culture that manifested in just that belief. This is what I'm doing. So that's one really powerful practice, is laddering people to the bigger purpose.